Before we go any further, I want you to do something uncomfortable. Stop multitasking. Close the extra tabs. Put the phone face down. If there's coffee in your hand, fine. But stop scrolling, because what is happening in the silver market right now is not something you can half listen to while checking Twitter. This is one of those moments where the screen is telling you one story, and the infrastructure underneath it is telling you a very different one. As of Friday, January 9th, 2026, silver closed at just over $80 an ounce, a massive green candle, nearly 5% in a single session. And I know exactly what most people are thinking right now because I've seen it play out 100 times. Victory laps, breakout charts. We're back. The bull market has resumed. Memes, champagne emojis. But here's the problem. You're staring at the scoreboard while the stadium itself is on fire. The price move is real, but it's not the story, it's a symptom. The actual event, the thing that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, isn't visible on CNBC. It's buried in the clearing data, the delivery reports, the plumbing of the futures market where very few people bother to look. And that's exactly where the alarm is coming from. Let me introduce myself quickly. I'm John A.G. I spend my time watching the parts of the market that don't want to be watched. And what showed up in the CME delivery data for the January 8th trade date is not normal, not healthy, and not something you see in a functioning paper market. We're not talking about a short squeeze. We're not talking about momentum traders. We're not talking about retail piling in. We're talking about a behavior that only shows up when trust breaks. 1,624 contracts stood for delivery. That ORES, over 8 million ounces of physical silver, demanded immediately in a window where liquidity is supposed to be drying up, not exploding. And here, as the detail that changes everything, these contracts did not just stand for delivery. They were moved backward in time. This is what most people miss. In futures markets, time normally flows in one direction. As contracts approach expiration, traders roll forward. January rolls into March, March into May. Nobody wants the metal. Nobody wants forklifts, vaults, insurance paperwork, or armored trucks showing up at the office. Futures are supposed to be clean, frictionless price exposure. But yesterday, time reversed. Instead of rolling forward into March, the liquid, safe, comfortable contract, traders abandoned it. They sold March. They paid the spread. They accepted transaction costs. They accepted logistical pain. And they rushed into near-term delivery. That's not optimization. That's panic with a balance sheet. Ask yourself the obvious question: why would a sophisticated institution rush into an expiring contract at the worst possible moment if they believed the metal would still be there later? Why not wait 60 days? There's only one answer that makes sense. They don't trust that 60 days exists. This is what's known as backward rolling, and it's one of the rarest, ugliest signals a futures market can produce. It's not about price, it's about confidence. It's the market quietly admitting that waiting has become dangerous. Look at the open interest. While January suddenly absorbed over 1,600 contracts demanding metal, the March contract bled more than 2,500 contracts in a single session. That's money fleeing the future. This isn't speculation, it's triage. In a healthy market, time is your friend. You're happy to hold future exposure. You trust the exchange, you trust the vaults, you trust that if you wait, delivery will be boring and uneventful. But when traders willingly collapse the timeline, when they move from March into January, they agree saying something very specific. The risk of waiting is higher than the cost of acting now. That belief is contagious. One whale does it, and the others notice. They see the delivery notices spike, they see inventories tightening, they see export restrictions hardening, and suddenly, nobody wants to be last in line. So they join the stampede. March gets sold, January gets bought, February lights up, and the entire curve starts to buckle. This is how backwardation forms when spot prices begin bidding higher than future prices. When the market actively incentivizes the removal of metal from vaults instead of its storage, when paper promises are discounted and immediacy commands a premium, that's a structural failure, not a trade. And the timing couldn't be worse. This is happening while physical supply chains are being strangled. Chinese export controls, solar demand, battery manufacturing, strategic stockpiling. We've talked about the pressure building for months. What you are seeing now is that pressure finally breaking through the paper layer and hitting the exchange. Those 8 million ounces didn't vanish into a warehouse in Delaware. Let's not kid ourselves. They're being loaded, shipped, reassigned. Once metal exits the COMEX ecosystem, it doesn't politely come back when liquidity needs improve. It's gone. The bullion banks rely on a very specific assumption. For every 100 ounces of paper silver sold, only one person will ever ask for delivery. That ratio is the entire business model. Yesterday, that ratio cracked. Too many people reached for the door at the same time. That's why silver is at $80. Not because of inflation narratives, not because of dollar weakness, not because retail finally figured something out. The price is repricing trust. A futures contract is only valuable if it's believed. And right now, belief is leaking out faster than inventory. Think of it like holding a ticket to an oversold concert. On paper, you're in. But if you don't get through the door early, if you wait, there's a very real chance you are watching from the parking lot. That's what backward rolling says out loud. And here's the uncomfortable part. If this is happening in January, traditionally a quieter period, what happens in March? What happens when the largest open interest month on the board approaches delivery and the buffet is already missing half the food? The math doesn't work. The inventory isn't there. The trust signal is already fired. And once markets lose confidence in time itself, things accelerate very quickly. This isn't a prediction. It's a diagnosis. When futures markets violate their own physics, when gravity flips direction, when institutions pay to move backward instead of forward, that's not bullish, bearish, or neutral. That's systemic. So enjoy the green candle if you want. Screenshot it, post it, celebrate it. But understand this. The real story isn't the breakout. It's the reason the breakout happened. And that reason is fear. Cold, institutional fear that the metal won't be there when the paper says it should be. And once that idea takes hold, markets don't gently return to normal. Let us start with something simple that most people don't like admitting. Rational actors don't to set money on fire unless they re-terrified of what happens if they don a T. That's the frame you need to understand what just happened in silver. Because no one, and I mean no one, voluntarily pays higher transaction fees, accepts logistical headaches, and takes on storage, insurance, and transport costs unless the alternative scares them more. In a system you trust, you delay. You wait. You let time work for you. You don't rush toward inconvenience unless the future itself feels unsafe. And yet, that's exactly what the market just did. If you genuinely believe the system was sound, if you believe the vaults were full, the chains were intact, and delivery in March was a boring formality, you would sit tight. You'd keep your capital where it was. You'd let the contract ride and save yourself the expense. That's how rational markets behave. So when traders willingly pay a premium to move backward in time, they are telling you something without saying a word. They are buying certainty. They are saying, I don't care what this costs me today. I care about possession. And that single sentence is a vote of no confidence in the entire paper structure. Every one of those 1,724 contracts that stood for delivery represents a sophisticated entity looking the comic straight in the eye and calling the bluff. It's the financial equivalent of someone walking into a crowded bank, seeing the line snake around the corner, and quietly sliding the teller some cash just to make sure they get theirs before the doors lock. When backward rolling appears, convenience yield doesn't rise, it detonates. The benefit of holding the physical asset goes vertical. The market is effectively screaming that a bird in the hand is no longer worth 2 in the bush. It's worth 10. And that's where the bullion banks lose control. Their entire model depends on forward rolling. They sell future promises knowing they'll never be tested. Paper is easy. Paper is infinite. Paper lets them manage price without touching inventory. But backward rolling flips the script. Suddenly, paper turns heavy. It turns into a physical obligation that must be settled in bars, not spreadsheets. And bars don't come out of printers. You can't quantitative ease silver. You can't re-hypothecate it forever once people start asking for it. You have to mine it, refine it, and ship it. Which means when 8 million ounces get pulled out of the system in a month and is supposed to be quiet, the buffer is gone. The float is gone. That's why the banks are nervous. Because if this many entities want metal in January, the question answers itself. What happens in March? If fear is already forcing delivery at $80, what does $85 do to behavior? Backward rolling is not the event. It's the first crack in the dam. It's smart money exiting a paper game before the audience realizes the rules have changed. And the proof isn't emotional, it's arithmetic. This isn't Twitter speculation. This isn't chart astrology. This is forensic accounting straight from the CME Group S Daily Bulletin, the black box of the silver market. Every position, every delivery, every transfer of obligation gets recorded there. And for January 8th, 2026, that black box didn't whisper. It screamed. Look at deliveries first. In a typical January, you might see a few notices. 10, 20. Loose ends being tied up. Instead, the ledger shows 1,124 delivery notices issued in a single day. Each contract represents 5,000 ounces. Now, do the math. That's 8.12 million ounces removed from the available float in 24 hours. That's not housekeeping. That's a raid. But deliveries alone don't explain backward rolling. To see that, you have to track where the contracts came from. You have to follow the open interest, the map of where capital is hiding. Start with March. March is the front month. It's the deep end of the pool. It's where liquidity lives. It's where institutions are supposed to sit comfortably. And yet, instead of growing, March bled. Open interest dropped by 2,163 contracts in a single session. Now, here's the key detail people miss. If traders were simply closing positions and leaving the market, total open interest would fall across the board. That didn't happen. The money didn't leave the casino. It walked across the floor and sat at a different table. The delivery table. Look at February. February is normally a ghost month, thin, illiquid, ignored. And suddenly, it gained 378 contracts. Ask yourself why anyone would voluntarily park capital in a dead month. Because February is closer than March. Because 30 days suddenly matters. This is line-cutting behavior. It's the same instinct you see at an emptying buffet. Manners disappear, protocol disappears, all that matters is being early. And then there's January itself. January should be a graveyard. Expiring contract, delivery notices flying, liquidity supposed to be gone. Instead, over 1,400 contracts traded electronically in a space the size of a phone booth. Traders were grabbing contracts, banks were trying to dump and immediately slamming them for delivery. Put it together, and the picture is unmistakable. March loses 2,500 contracts. January and February absorb them. Metal leaves the vault. That's a bank run, just with bars instead of cash. When depositors move money from a long-term account into checking, they want access. When silver traders move from March into January, they want possession. And this is the smoking gun that proves the $80 price isn't speculative enthusiasm. It's a forced repricing caused by physical scarcity. The market is cannibalizing the future to survive the present. But here's the flaw in that strategy. The future is finite. March open interest is already shrinking. Roughly 2,800 contracts remain, and that buffer is thinning daily. Every backward roll weakens the wall protecting the exchange from a delivery crisis. So why now? Why January 8th? Why did psychology snap on this specific date? Because a quiet economic variable just went feral. Convenience yield. Normally, convenience yield is boring. Textbook stuff. The idea that holding physical commodities carries costs, storage, insurance, security. So paper is preferable. That's why futures typically trade above spot. That condition is called contango, and it's what healthy, well-supplied markets look like. But convenience yield doesn't disappear. It waits. And when supply chains tighten and trust erodes, it comes back with a vengeance. Right now, holding physical silver offers something paper no longer can: certainty. And that certainty is now worth more than storage fees, more than insurance, more than transaction costs combined. The paper contract has acquired a hidden cost that wasn't priced in before: counterparty risk. The risk that, when you ask for delivery, the vault answers with silence. Think of it this way. If you're in a city with clean water everywhere, a voucher promising delivery next week is fine. You'll wait. But if you're stranded in the desert, that voucher is worthless. You will trade everything you own for water right now. That's convenience yield. And right now, the silver market is very, very thirsty. Those 1,624 backward rolls weren't traders being clever. They were traders being honest. Honest about what they trust. Honest about what they don't. And once that honesty enters the market, paper structures don't fail gracefully. They fail fast. At some point, markets stop rewarding patience. And when that moment arrives, time itself turns hostile. That's exactly what we're watching now. The traders who abandoned the March contract didn't suddenly lose discipline. They didn't forget how futures markets work. They looked at March and didn't see a standard rollover opportunity. They saw a promise that might not survive long enough to be honored. A voucher for water in a future that isn't guaranteed. They surveyed the geopolitical landscape. They saw inventories shrinking, trade lanes tightening, and export rules hardening in real time. And they came to a conclusion that most pricing models are not designed to handle. Waiting is no longer neutral. Waiting is a risk. Every extra day carries exposure. Another day for export controls to tighten. Another day for a force majeure clause to appear out of thin air. Another day where paper claims stack higher while physical inventory quietly thins out. At that point, the clock stops being an asset and starts behaving like a liability. This is what economists call a time preference collapse. In stable systems, time preference is low. People think in years. They invest for decades. Delayed gratification makes sense because the system is expected to remain intact. But when confidence erodes, the horizon compresses. Years turn into months, months into days. Eventually, the only time frame that matters is now. No one is asking what silver trades at in 2027. They're asking where it will be tonight. That psychological shift is fatal to the banking models that manage futures markets. Their algorithms assume patience can always be bought. They assume that if the price of March rises enough, traders will willingly sell January and wait. They assume every participant has a price at which delay becomes acceptable. Yesterday proved that assumption false. Because when people believe supply itself is in question, incentives stop working. You can't bribe a drowning man with a promise of oxygen next quarter. The banks almost certainly tried. They likely widened spreads, offered roll incentives, leaned on their usual levers, and the market shrugged. That's why backward rolling matters so much. It marks the exact moment when the utility of paper collapses. A futures market that cannot guarantee delivery ceases to be a hedging mechanism. It becomes a casino for trading currency sentiment, and the serious players don a T gamble with factories on the line. Industrial users don't hedge for fun, they hedge to survive. And when the hedge no longer guarantees supply, they walk away from the table and demand the asset itself. That drains liquidity, and nature hates a vacuum. But there's one more piece to this puzzle: the destination. Silver didn't simply vanish from New York. It didn't dissolve into thin air. It was pulled, aggressively, but toward a much stronger gravitational field. To understand why the convenience yield exploded in New York, you have to look east. Because while traders in the West are staring at $80 silver on COMEX, physical silver in Shanghai is trading dramatically higher. Premiums of $7 per ounce or more are not theoretical. They are real, executable, and persistent. And that changes everything. For a global trader, this is the simplest trade on earth. Acquire a bar in New York at $80, ship it east, sell it for $87. Nearly a 10% return in days, not years. No leverage, no forecasting, just logistics. It is an arbitrage dream, the kind that doesn't last long because it eats the very inventory it depends on, and that is the Asian vortex. The backward rolling we saw wasn't just fear-driven, it was opportunistic. Traders weren't only worried about default risk. They were racing each other to extract inventory before the window closed. Every day of delay is lost profit. Every day risks a new regulation, a shipping restriction, or a political decision that slams the door shut. So they cannibalized March to feed January. Why? They collapsed the timeline. They drained Western vaults to supply Eastern demand. That's why convenience yield is exploding. The convenience isn't storage, it's exportability. A bar sitting in New York is raw potential. A bar in Shanghai is a monetized asset inside a protected ecosystem. And COMEX is the donor. This isn't random market behavior, it's strategic. China is not paying a premium because silver is shiny, they're paying because they need it. As of January 1st, 2026, China implemented strict export controls on critical minerals, silver included. What enters China stays in China. But imports were never restricted. So while the West debates narratives, China is hoarding. Quietly, systematically, building a strategic silver reserve to support solar dominance, electrification, data centers, defense manufacturing, the infrastructure of the next decade. They understand something the paper markets are just beginning to relearn. Silver isn't a commodity anymore. It's a strategic input. It's energy. It's technology. It's leverage. By maintaining a higher Shanghai price, China turns its market into a vacuum cleaner. Global inventory flows toward it naturally, legally, and relentlessly. And the Western banks can't stop it. COMEX is rule-bound. If a trader stands for delivery, the metal must be delivered. The exchange cannot dictate where it goes next. The banks can't say, please don't ship that to Shanghai. That would be a default, and defaults end markets instantly. So they comply, they hand over the bars, and they watch inventory exit the system knowing full well those bars are never coming back. Once metal enters the Shanghai Gold Exchange ecosystem, it's effectively gone from the Western float. It's a one-way valve. That's the context for what we saw. Backward rolling wasn't noise, it was the sound of the exit door being forced open. The smart money understands the vault is leaking. They understand JPMorgan and the COMEX cannot feed the Asian vacuum forever. At some point, and that point is approaching fast, available inventory hits, effective zero. Not absolute zero, but functional zero, where remaining holders refuse to sell at any price. When that happens, the arbitrage stops. Not because demand fades, but because supply is gone. And when arbitrage stops, the price in New York has only one option left. It must rise to meet Shanghai. It must gap higher, violently, simply to stop the bleeding. That's why $80 is not expensive. It's discounted reality. The West is running a going out of business sale on silver, and the East is buying the entire store. Yesterday's $100 silver contracts were just early shoppers. The crowd hasn't arrived yet. Which brings us to the conclusion, and it's unavoidable. We have the breakout. We have backward rolling. We have time preference collapse. We have the Asian vortex. All roads lead to the same destination. Triple digits is no longer a bold prediction. It's a mechanical outcome. The bridge to $100 is built. The market is already walking across it. Markets like this do not calmly reverse. Trust, once broken, does not heal overnight. Bank runs don't end because someone reassures depositors. They end when the vault is empty. The backward rolling we saw is the first tremor. Next comes industrial panic. Solar manufacturers, battery producers, defense contractors, they will read this data and realize their supply chains are exposed. And when that happens, price becomes irrelevant. They will buy at $80, They will buy at $90. They will buy at $100 because the alternative is shutting down production. The banks will fight back. They always do. Paper raids, overnight smashes, red candles meant to scare weak hands. But every smash widens the Shanghai spread. Every smash strengthens the vacuum. The system is already broken. The illusion that sustained it for decades evaporated under its own math. We are moving back to a world where possession matters, where paper claims lose to physical control, where wealth in hand outperforms wealth on screen. $100 is not the end, it's a checkpoint. Once it's crossed, the narrative changes, media wakes up, retail arrives. And by the time they do, the vaults will be empty and the signs will read, sold out. The people who win are the ones who acted when the backward roll fired. Not later, not in March. Now, this is the signal. The data is confirmed, the future is bleeding, the present is being seized. Secure the metal, secure the position. The countdown is effectively over. The backward roll was the smoking gun. The destination is triple digits.